Okay, it is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with the Community Planning and Transportation Committee meeting for Thursday, October 24th, 2024. Welcome to everybody also watching at home on YouTube, and just a reminder that you can watch a replay of this meeting and all of our city meetings generally on the City of Norman YouTube channel. If you can't watch live, you can watch the replay. And please feel free to email or contact any of us on council if you have any comments or questions that you'd like us to address in future meetings. We have 2 items on the agenda today. Our first one is our regular presentation or update from city staff on public transit for this past month. And so we have Taylor here to go over that with us.
Thank you, council member. This month is particularly exciting because we're officially a year into the route changes we made and moving into our downtown transit center at 320 East Comanche. So next month, we'll be able to show you ongoing apples to apples comparisons with the route changes we made last October, and we saw significant growth over the last year. So hopefully we'll continue to see that growth as we compare it with the changes we made. And even more exciting, on Monday, we're adding frequency to Route 112. That was approved with council through the budget process, and working with Embark to get that on schedule for implementation. So that route's going from 60-minute service. You see a bus once an hour, right? Now you'll see a bus twice an hour. And as you can see in the ridership report, it is grown significantly. I mean, obviously, again, we're not comparing apples to apples with the previous routes, but that route was the next priority in the long-range plan to have increased frequency added to it. And I think that was a good job by the consultant to make that recommendation, as we can see. So that's exciting. And just speaking of ridership, in September, we had just under 45,000 rides for the Embark Norman system compared to a little over 35,000 rides last September. So daily ridership was 1,862 this past month. It's about a 30% increase from last September. So we're still going on at a pretty good clip for our ridership. And again, hopefully that stays true as we start comparing it with the route changes we made a year ago. We even saw Plus go up about 350 this past month as well, comparing it to last September. So good weather for October, I'd say, for people getting out and about, so that could have something to do with it. But overall, it was a high ridership month. And then pointing out the Norman On Demand ridership, which is further along in your packet. For September, we had 4,760 riders use Norman On Demand, and in September 2023, we had 2,223. So that's a 53% increase over last year, September. Now, last year we were just over a month into the program, so we've obviously gained steam over the past year, getting people acclimated to the system, plus onboarding new riders as the semester kicked off with OU and the town kind of came back alive, so to speak. And we're just seeing a lot of interest in that service. I think we'll just monitor it as we go into the year and see if that ridership holds, or if people use it the first couple months, and then as they get acclimated to Norman, they choose other modes of transportation. So
I noticed that the wheelchair accessible vehicles completed trips for the year from July 1st to 64. 33 of them were just in the month of September alone.
Yeah.
Wonder what the reasoning?
That's a good question. July was relatively lower ridership just because there's less demand in the summer in general. So I would suspect that middle of August, and then going into September, we saw some more demand in that. But we could go back and look at those previous months just to see how it all shaped out past few months.
72, almost 73% increase in year-over-year service for the wheelchair accessible vehicles, and it's pretty interesting. And specifically since that's one of the main reasons why we created this was to address wheelchair accessibility. So that's encouraging, though. I'm hoping that it is a reflection that more and more of our residents that need that service are finding out about Norman On Demand and using it, even though it's not running during the daytime generally, but that it's. I would be interested to see what, if we have that data, when are people riding it at, like, from, when are people riding it? When's the peak hour? Is it 9 p.m.? Is it 10 p.m.? Is it 2 a.m. when the bars close? Kind of be interested to see that as well. When are people riding it the most?
Yeah, we could come
And
back.
if we think there would be more demand for extending it further into the daytime or having more overlap with the buses
Yeah.
and stuff.
We could come back with some more detailed data on that. I know Sundays are pretty popular. I mean, we do cover a large swath of Sunday, and it's during the day. So we may start looking at that more closely on travel patterns. And that was always kind of a pilot in and of itself on if we need fixed routes on Sunday, right? Which is a lot bigger of a lift to add big buses for a day than. So we're kind of looking at all that with Norman On Demand. Again, it's a little over a year old, so we've kind of made some tweaks here and there as we come back to council over the past year. So we feel like we finally have a year's worth of data where we can start looking at some of those things more in depth.
I definitely would like to see, like, 7 days a week, what is the, not only like peak time of the day that are when it's most popular, but what throughout the week, is it more popular on Wednesday or is it Sunday or whatever? And I think something to think about going forward before we get to next year and a decision on whether to extend it again or make it permanent or not renew it would be, and maybe they've already done it, but some different concepts of the fee. So $2 flat fee currently, right? People have asked about expanding it in time and expanding it to serve during the daytime. And I've kind of said, well, it's possible. We may have to look at the fee that we're charging at $2 base fee. That maybe it's $5. I don't know, but some probably different scenarios on what different service levels would look like if we increased the base or the flat fee from $2 to whatever before we get to next year. So, Councilmember Grant.
Yeah, along the lines of future funding and expansion, are there grants out there either at the federal or state level? If we have like a year's worth of data, I think that would lend itself well to saying, oh, we really do have a demand for this, and maybe that would make us competitive for those grants if they're out there.
Yeah, there are some. They're usually for startups or beginning the service. So when we first started the service, we didn't really have time to go after those grants because we kind of give them direction to go ahead and get it done. If we expanded the service in some way, there might be opportunities to maybe get a year or two of that, expansion cost paid for. We could, the service could utilize some of our FTA funding if all the proper contracting was done with all the federal clauses and things, but we utilize all that funding for the current service that we provide. So there are grants and funding out there. It's just usually not for ongoing operations. It's usually for 1 or 2 years of a startup or expansion. So
maybe
as
expansion,
but then ongoing, it would be
the hard
obviously
part.
the ongoing maintenance of the funding, if that makes sense.
I don't think this on demand goes up to more Norman Tech.
No, not right now. The first that goes is Tecumseh and Rock Creek, roughly.
Might be worth thinking about if a grant is available for expansion, approaching them and asking about, as I understood it, they have money that they could put towards this, helping with the operational costs after that expansion is implemented. Okay, that's just it for me.
Yeah, and I've definitely had requests about could it be expanded to cover. We already did Edna Parkway and all the way up 36, but to cover the Norman Regional 9 Emergency Center. I've had a few people ask about it going to any NCED. And then, of course, the East Side Library branch. Had people ask about that. And then, yeah, more Norman area as well, so. And I
And-
just told people, there's costs associated with expanding.
Right,
so.
and, a few of those services, like the East Side Library and Moore Norman Tech, obviously the hours have run in
Right.
play right there, right? So if we go to one of those locations, then the hours would need to be increased, which affects the whole area, not just
Right.
expanding it. We have, been talking to the operator via about, what it would take to expand to Norman Regional 9 and the NCED area. I think that came out of CP&T a few months ago. We're still going back and forth with them. We can obviously consider that with the budget process, but you'll just have to weigh with all the other considerations we have for next year.
Okay. The only other thing too, just noting that, there's, our busiest route, East Lindsay 111, a 52% increase in ridership since we changed the route. I know that one was one we were
Yep.
having a hard time with changing because of how heavily it was already used, and then removing stops and adding more stops that allow it to go further east than it ever has before. But seems to have resulted in more people riding that route than even were before.
Yeah, I think it's a really good route. It's anchored by the university in downtown on one end, as well as, obviously the transit center, and then Homeland, Walmart on the other end with, housing, apartment complexes, multifamily in between. And it's, I think, if you don't, people may not have to transfer to another bus route to get everything they need if they live along that route, right? So I think it is heavily utilized for that reason, going either direction on it. So, yeah, and that actually is called out later on in the plan to add another bus to it, because we foresaw it being heavily ridden to make it 15-minute service, but that's
Yeah,
a few
it's got-
priorities down the road.
its ridership is almost more than all the other routes combined, actually. So,
Mhm.
and I agree. The factors you mentioned are the same ones I've observed for why that would be the case. Does the Social Security bus, it departs from the transit center? Is that right?
Right.
How many times a day?
So it's Tuesdays and Friday afternoons, and it leaves from the transit center once, and then drops people off, and then comes back a couple hours later, lets people do their business, and then picks them back up and brings them back.
Is that one different than the Sooner Express,
Yes,
which goes to Oklahoma City?
right.
And that also departs the transit center.
Yes, and the Sooner Express, or I think now we're calling it the Norman Express, either way.
Okay.
It's completely operated out of Embark OKC, so you
It
all
comes
are.
down.
Yeah,
Okay.
it comes down and back, but it's is it 9 times a day now? I can't remember, 7 or 9 times a day. But that's why you don't see it reflected on here, is because it's not technically a part of our budget and our route system, even though they serve us. It's being paid for and counted up for Oklahoma City ridership, if that makes sense. But we could start showing you that if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how many people are riding it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's running 9 times a day, I would assume it's probably a lot.
Yeah, and they started the 9, I think it's 9 times a day, when they made the switch to take over the full service. I think it was a year after we took it over. So,
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to know how many people are riding or commuting to OKC from Norman and or maybe commuting to Norman. So just, continues to be really encouraging to see ridership in the public transit system increasing like exponentially in some of these routes. So,
so hopefully next month we'll still have that good news again. It'll be interesting to see if once we start comparing the route changes to route changes. So.
okay. Do continue to have requests for specifically the East Side Library from Councilmember Ball and constituency hears from. So we've gone over how changing routes has an impact and how that can be very difficult to do, but he does continue to express that desire to find a way to get some transit over there. Let's see, I think that's I did, like I mentioned, I noticed the new bench in front of the transit center. I've seen a bunch of people sitting on it already, so it seems to be a good spot for that. And I appreciate you guys getting that done. Any final comments, questions from council about public transit?
Oh, I do have.
Councilor O'Gara?
So has Healthy Living Norman started the process of asking folks that utilize the all if they're, was it Embark Plus or
The new one they were talking about.
to cover like transit to their, we looked at bus route changes and that didn't seem to be the
Right,
way,
so we were gonna come back to you all this month and talk some more about Embark Well. Unfortunately, there was some miscommunication with myself and the city clerk's office on getting it on the agenda, so
Okay.
we'll have to reschedule that, but,
Okay. It's in the works.
it's still in the works, yeah. I've talked to Marilyn Dillon about it, and we wanna come back and clarify a few things with you all and have a more in-depth discussion about it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, I don't see any other comments or questions about public transit, so we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much, Taylor.
Thank you.
Appreciate the update as always. And item number 2 on the agenda is a discussion regarding the use of road diets and roundabouts on roadways. And again, the reason for this discussion is just we've had ongoing discussions about traffic safety, traffic collisions, Highway 9, signalized intersections, the new roundabout on James Garner that I'm a big fan of and I've been using a lot lately and has saved a bunch of time for me getting in and out of Norman, especially in and out of downtown. And if anything, just not having to go through the intersection of Flood and Robinson is the biggest benefit of that project, in my opinion. But I've been driving Texas and Kansas lately, and I've come across some rural roundabouts where 2 rural roads meet each other, and it's a roundabout instead of a 4-way stop, which has been interesting. And then we've just continued to have discussions about potential locations in Norman for roundabouts, where they might be appropriate to replace existing 4-way stops, or where they might be appropriate just in intersections in general in Norman. And I know we have at least one more coming down the road here on South Jenkins in Ward 7, so I'm excited about that one. But we generally, I think most people generally understand that roundabouts are a safer option in most cases for intersections and allow traffic to move continuously, ideally, and save on emissions, save on electricity, save on time, gas, and are generally safer when it comes to reducing traffic collisions and fatality crashes specifically. And so just wanted to continue the discussion about that and where throughout Norman might be most appropriate that staff is already looking at or maybe isn't looking at yet. And then the road diets discussion as well, just as traffic patterns may change in Norman. And we've done some road diet projects in Norman already that I think have been successful, and I know staff has some other ones that they've been looking at. And so I just want to continue that discussion, especially now that the Porter project is wrapped up and Gray Street is underway and James Garner Phase 2 is finished and Phase 3 will be starting in the near future. So just a continued discussion of those 2 issues. And I appreciate staff being here to talk about it with us.
Thank you, council members. Scott Sturts, Interim Director of Public Works. I have Brett Cabin is here with Garver. They are working with us on the AIM for the Comprehensive Transportation Plan update. And a lot of what we're discussing here is very applicable to that plan. And we have some ways that we think that we can utilize this update to really give us some tools to assist us in the future as we start to look at these 2 items specifically. So ask Brett if he'd come and join me. We're going to kind of co-present here today. Not a whole lot of a presentation, but a little bit, and then basically open it up for questions and discussion so that we can get a little bit more of a flavor and we can give you our thoughts and we can start to shape a program and to where we can have a consistent and monitored approach to all these items. I agree with you. I think that the new roundabout, I've been really impressed watching it. I drove it out of there the night we opened it, and I drive it every day on the way back and forth to work, and I've been really impressed how people are starting to understand it. We're seeing People aren't stopping at the yield to make sure there's no one coming. You're starting to see the gap acceptance start to reduce, so there's less lag time, and it's starting to flow even, it seems like every week it's a little bit smoother and a little bit better. And I think that's really exciting, and as we do bring on the other end of the street, down at what'll be the new intersection of Jenkins, Constitution, and Imhoff, we'll put one in there. I think it's interesting. The same road's gonna have it on both ends. I think that's kind of interesting. Not planned, but it works out well.
I'd say too, people are starting to understand that people in the circle have the right of way. You gotta yield to them first. And so
Yeah.
I don't think at the beginning everyone was getting that, but I think at least on my latest trip around it, 2 cars were coming north on Flood, and both stopped when they saw me going through. So
Yeah, and it's, we did, after watching that, after it opened, we realized that there could be some adjustments in the signage. So we did go out and put yield to
nice.
and some other items we put up. We didn't think that the signage that was up for which direction to go, kind of the roadway signage, we felt it could be a little bit bigger, so we made that a little bit bigger. But part of that was just operational usage and learning how it's going to operate. So that's been an exciting time, and obviously we've had the Main Street roundabout for a while now, and there's a few other that are more residential areas or in commercial areas. But definitely it's something that we support. We do look at those. There's costs in there that sometimes you can actually do it cheaper than you can a signalized intersection. But there's a lot of things that go into that, and that's why to us, we think it's important that we have something that we can replicate and we can be consistent with, that gives us a way to judge and score, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Because if it's going to cost $200,000 and we have 3 options, we want to have a way to rank those. We don't want to just go, well, we think we like that one better. So that's kind of what we're going to get into here in a minute. There are some locations that we've been looking at over time that we think are great candidates. This is one that we've talked about many times. They're the odd 5-legged intersection at Alameda, Crawford, and Apache. Staff have looked at this one. We agree that this looks like a very good candidate. We already have the who stops, who doesn't confusion, and adding more stop signs really doesn't solve it. It may just make it worse. So this is a spot that we really think is a good application of this. We have submitted it to the capital program for a couple of years. We'll submit it again this year, and we'll continue to look for funding options for this because we think this is one that may be able to go for a safety program or other programs. We spend a lot of time looking at can we find grant funding that we can apply to a project, and we see one, we read that notice of NOFO, I just went blank. But we usually look at those and we say, do we have anything that we could apply this to? Can we fit it into our program? But this one, like we said, there's a lot of space there. You can see in the middle. Just out of curiosity, I went and I measured the diameter of the one at Main Street, and it's 125 foot from curb to curb. And that's probably about what we need to continue to look at because we want to make sure that we can get trucks through an intersection. We don't want to have a situation where we have trucks running through people's yards or through landscaped areas. So, and that's not a hard, fast rule. That was just, I could get quickly and pull up to look at. And there's some space here. There may be a little bit of right of way that would be necessary, but we're not sure exactly what it would take. But as we move forward, we can move into a design if we actually had a project identified with funding.
Well, this is one my dad has specifically asked me about more than once, and that I've driven through many times, and it is. I remember when I think it was an all-way stop before. Now it's a 2-leg stop, and I definitely see the confused look on people's faces. They're like, "Who's this?" So, but yeah, I think it would be a great candidate because of the way it's angled, and you got 5 streets converging at once right there, and the only, real main thing would be about impact to any of the existing properties with whatever right-of-way might be.
And anytime you have confusing geometry, the examples we're going to show you today all have kind of a 5-legged geometry or something unique to that would make it a really strong candidate. So we agree.
Councilmember Grant?
So what was the measurement again for the East Main roundabout, 125?
It's approximately 125 feet. I literally took it off of our GIS and just drew a line and about 125 feet for a good rough number.
What is Do you know a rough number of
I-
what that one is?
I did not actually measure right away to right away on this one. Just,
Yeah, it's
just
early, yeah.
but, you know, I mean, obviously you can see that there's a lot of space there, and we may have to obtain a little bit of right of way just to get those corners to go through and make sure that sidewalks are within right of way. But that would take a lot of, that would take a little bit more of that design time to get that in. Also, when you start looking at five-legged intersections, your geometry gets really complicated because the way you enter and exit is important so that people don't shortcut and go the wrong way. And so you're lining people up so you decrease those severities of impacts. So geometry is very important, and that would take a lot more look in this one, just like the one at James Garner and Flood, because the weird three-legged and it not quite coming in all square. It took a lot of effort to get that geometry to actually create the flow and to be able to maintain the speeds. Slow them down enough and maintain speeds. There's kind of a balance in there that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But this is definitely a top candidate and one that we definitely identify, and we would like to continue to, or we will continue to look at this location.
And if not a roundabout, some other creative traffic control way to deal with that intersection would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think a roundabout is very applicable here and make a lot of sense.
One thing too, Scott, is I don't know if it's part of your presentation or if you have much of it to go on yet, but maybe at next month, if you're not planning to talk about it today, if staff has compiled any data on the new roundabout as far as crashes or traffic counts or anything, I think that would be helpful to.
Well, we did traffic counts on James Garner right after, because we had the speed limit set at 25 and we kept hearing it's too
Right.
slow, it's too slow, it's too slow. So we did do traffic counts at that point. I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but we could get those. We could set up, give it. I think that people are I'm still seeing increased usage of it. So I don't know that we're quite at that final number yet. So it's probably worth giving it just a little more time to let it kind of get to a more normalized and get people really used to it. And then we could definitely do that, and it'd be interesting to see what those counts are and who's using it.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything major happening, but I had some people comment before we opened it that it would be a complete disaster and there'd be so many crashes right away that we would rip it all up and replace it within a year. So.
Yeah, I get those comments too. I do think I heard that there was one accident.
There's something on the slide here, just a second.
Okay.
I think there was one accident early on, and I actually think it may have involved a police car getting sideswiped or something.
That's what I
I haven't heard the whole story there, but yeah. We'd be happy. We'll continue to watch it, and we feel like we kind of start feeling like numbers are starting to normalize. But it may be better if we could wait till maybe after the first year,
Yeah.
where we could get a little more time. Because like I said, I notice every week, I feel like there's just a little bit more traffic in both directions. And I noticed the other day I went through there and 5 cars in a row, we all went around and came down James Garner going southbound. So I feel like we're still gaining
They
that.
went up and then around and came back.
No, going southbound,
Oh, okay.
went on to James Garner.
Okay.
I've only had about 3 people do that in front of me so far, where they're going,
All the way.
yeah, all the way around from James Garner to continue southbound, or to go southbound, not continue southbound. But let us get till a little after the first of the year, and then we can go out there, maybe we can look at some numbers, and we can compare that first month numbers to where we are there, and that may kind of help us do some projections and help us with some growth there.
That'd be great to.
At the time of the speed study, the volume was about 3,400 per day, and we know that it's higher than that now.
Going through using James Garner
Yes,
and probably going through the roundabout, obviously going through.
Yeah, if you're on James Garner, you're going through the roundabout one way or the other.
And I assume if there have been crashes, that they're probably not fatality crashes, because it really does force you to slow down, especially if you're going south.
Yeah.
Approaching it, so.
But we can certainly work with our police department. We have access to crash data, and so after the first year, we'll pull those numbers and come back and give you an update when maybe we can start seeing where those numbers start coming a little bit better.
Okay.
This is one that David and I have actually talked about on several occasions. It seems kind of unusual. This is the Franklin Road and Porter Avenue, and then the way that Broadway comes in there. It's a very awkward intersection. driven it since I was pretty young.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it would be a classic location where you could come in. We've got a lot of right-of-way there. It seems like you could, instead of hooking Broadway to come in 90 degrees to Porter, you could continue it south a little bit more and into a roundabout situation. In fact, it's almost a roundabout today, just kind of oval, but it doesn't
Yeah.
quite get there. But this is one that we think would be an interesting. It's kind of that borderline urban and rural. So it'd be a kind of a start of going into the more rural type of areas and more less urbanized. So this is one that we've looked at before, and we really like the idea of at least investigating it here. We've also talked about maybe trying to partner with some other agencies to get some funding to help us look at this one. And those discussions are ongoing. But this is another one that I think would just be really, it would get rid of a four-way stop. It would get rid of that weird cut through to get to Broadway. It would take some conflict points out. So this is another situation I think would be a pretty good opportunity for us to be able to come in and do something here. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of right-of-way in this one too. So that also is kind of a benefit in this location.
It's the only flashing signal in Norman that I know of. That's a red,
That's
just
a
a
red
red flashing light.
flash.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, it's,
That's a joke with my guys. Anytime a new signal tech starts, we'll tell them, hey, Porter and Franklin's in flash.
go check it out.
Go check it out.
That's me.
And then they have to go check it.
That's me.
So this is another great example where we think that we could come in.
Before you jump off this, I didn't want to interrupt. This would be a great opportunity for what they call a dumbbell roundabout that basically has two roundabouts, one on the south end and then one at the Broadway
I
location.
saw a video of one of those yesterday and I posted about it. I think they called it a peanut.
Peanut dog
Yes.
bone.
Dumbbells.
Dumbbell.
Yeah, and it was a example of an intersection almost just like this. Well, this setting, two rural roads that had a weird angle, and that the peanut shaped or dumbbell actually helped reduce the needed amount of space and reduce the impact to the surrounding properties.
Yeah, I think that's why we'd like for this one to be studied. We do think there are opportunities. I agree that, we've talked about could it be ovalized? I don't know that a true just roundabout may not be the answer here, but this is a location for definite further study. And then another one, this one is probably a much lower vehicle usage, but Carter, Eufaula, and Cockrell. So one of those five-legged intersections, just a little bit south of Main Street. Again, geometry-wise, it lends itself really well. We would have to have a little bit of right-of-way in this location. It doesn't quite fit the 125 foot, but this is one that you may look at, and after study, you may not need to be able to, you may not have to look at getting as large of a vehicle through it. That would be something that I would turn over to the experts and let them study, and we can come up with answers on that one. This is another potential, and there's a few other locations around this applies to that could occur also. But these are kind of the main three that we really came up with quickly, just in looking around. But then we started to go into, what about other intersections? What about the four-way stops? What about the rural stops? Where we're looking at four-way stops. Can we have a system in place, a policy in place where we can stop and look at those? And while we're doing that same study for adding stops, can we evaluate them at the same time to be a roundabout? And then we could have that discussion and look at it that way. But then there also needs to be, like I said earlier, we want to have a way that we can compare three roundabouts, because we're looking at a cost issue here compared to putting two new stop signs out, which is really a pretty negligible cost, to spending $200,000, depending on right-of-way and the size of the roundabout and the location. So, we want to make sure that we do something. That's where we've been working with Garver and with Brett and his team. And from there, I'll let Brett kind of talk about some of the thoughts that they have so far, which is still a work in process.
Can I offer one more thing before you turn it over to Brett? Scott and I have also talked about, James Garner, one of the biggest complaints that we've received about James Garner is that it has to stop at Acres. And we don't have a solution for that because we can't stop Acres because it would back up on the tracks, just like we took away the four-way stop at Jones and Acres. But this peanut or dumbbell roundabout could be a solution there.
at Acres and James Garner
And Jones.
and Jones, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the negative to it would be you'd probably have to, if you're going northbound on Acres, you'd have to go over to Jones and back around, but that's probably no worse than the stop time you have there anyways.
Yeah.
But just a discussion, that was something David and I kind
Yeah.
of were throwing around, what are alternate options that we could potentially do here? And that was one that kind of got discussed.
it seems like we definitely have more space to do it on this side of the track, Acres and James Garner, but yeah, that'd be interesting, and I think that would be very helpful, because the only other option would be a traffic signal, and I don't think we want to put one right there,
Right.
or ideally not have to put one right there. I guess if it was synced up with the crossing like we're gonna do on Main and Gray, then
Yeah, it would
But,
have to be. It's well under the criteria for that.
I haven't really had a problem crossing Acres yet while using James Garner, but I can see as it continues to increase that could.
At peak times, you can have challenges there. There are people who are kind of talking about gap acceptance, very small gap acceptance. There have been times where the cars are literally just pulling out right in front of cars that have the through traffic. But it's just another option, another one that we could definitely, investigate in the future.
There is a sort of rural one that it's in front of Deer Creek High School, but at Covell Road and Covell and MacArthur, there's a brand new one, and it looks like it's smaller than the one we have on Main Street, and it's in front of Deer Creek High School, so I don't know. But
And
that's one
it's-
maybe.
So what we would need to do is we'd want to make sure that whatever we design for, and that's part of the considerations that we're working with Garver on, is what's the expectation? If it's going out rural, we need to make sure that somebody who's pulling a cattle trailer or an RV with a boat, we've got to make sure we design it for that. We don't want to design it where they're not being able to make it through, or they're having,
Right.
causing major problems. So that's one of the things, and I will kind of let Brett take over from there.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott, appreciate it. Really, the slides that we're gonna talk about are from more of the federal design guidelines. It's not boiled down to what we would see specifically here in Norman. It's really kind of our starting point. And these are some of the things that we'll be talking about in the AIM Norman Transportation Master Plan update. And right now, we're kind of trying to figure out where this section would go. Would it really go under the safety section and traffic, or would it really be more applicable in the roadway section through here? But really, some of the things, the criteria as we talk about to consider when we look at roundabouts, obviously safety is primarily number one. Then you have operational performance that we have to think about, spatial performance, requirements that, if we're in a very urbanized area, do we, have limited area to work with through there, as we talked about some of the intersections here in Norman. And then access management, do we control one access point a little more than the other? And you see obviously the photo that was taken on the ribbon cutting night of James Garner right there. There are others, environmental considerations, obviously, operational maintenance costs. And when we start talking about those, a great example of the maintenance is, the landscaping inside the circle through there. Is this going to be used for calming traffic volumes? Very similar to James Garner right now. And then the aesthetics, as you see with the Revolutions art piece through there. You touched on something earlier about acceptance of roundabouts. And the small graph here is more of a generalization on more of a national level. And it goes from very negative to negative, neutral, positive, and very positive. And this is kind of the before and after. And what you really see is negative before in the darker greens here, and very negative prior to construction. And then once somebody gets in the mindset of using a roundabout, you see that the acceptance levels really start to go up quite a bit, quite dramatically really in this area. So really the education of the driving public is one of the big things prior to construction through there. But once people get used to them, the acceptance of those are very, very good.
I think once people realize you don't have to stop and wait at a traffic light for several minutes over and over again every single day. It's like,
Yes.
that's the biggest thing I explain to people is the frustration of having to wait. People, oh, just this week on Norman community page, they're like, the engineers of Norman must not drive on these streets because they're purposely trying to control the lights and
We
make.
drive on them.
And I'm like, so the traffic lights in Norman are the thing people complain about a lot, is that we have so many of them, or they aren't timed right, or they take forever. And I'm just like, roundabouts allow you to not have to ever just yield and keep going, yield and keep going.
True, and I will caution you, and the next slide probably talks a little bit more about that, is where do we really start using these? Because a roundabout is not applicable in all traffic situations. You know, obviously what we look at is for an intersection is the number and severity of your crashes types. I think that is probably the primary number one factor that we look at. Again, safety. You know, the high traffic delays are both legs or all four legs seeing a major delay during peak hours. The complexity of the geometry. We use Broadway, Porter, and Franklin as a great example. You know, is that geometry very complex, or can it be very simplistic to a rural four-lane or four-way stop location? The frequency of turns. So now you're starting to look at, for instance, James Garner, and I will use that quite often since I'm most familiar with it. You know, what is the expectancy of those left southbound flood left onto James Garner, particularly for those northbound, you know, on flood? What is that expectancy? Went through this morning, I go through it morning and night. Still saw one vehicle not yield to the roundabout. Person inside the roundabout was smart, yielded. Everything else went through just fine. And you want to balance those traffic flows. You can't really have one predominant flow going in one direction. And the good thing about that is you have to have some studies prior to help with this development of a roundabout.
If I can, real quick.
Yes.
So you may recall back when we were doing the Lindsay Street project, our friends at the University of Oklahoma decided that they wanted to hire their own consultants and come up with their own plan after we were already well in design. And their plan was to put a roundabout at every single intersection and at both sides of the interstate. So it was gonna be like 7 or 8 roundabouts. And our immediate response was no. And the reason why, even though we know that roundabouts are very effective, is because the east-west on Lindsay Street would never give enough of a break for the people north-south on the side streets to actually get through. And that was the reason why in that application, it didn't work. And the traffic data supported that when we got into it. But it wasn't that we didn't want the roundabouts, because people were like, well, you were against roundabouts for Lindsay. I said, I was against roundabouts for Lindsay, not when Lindsay was under design. So that's an example of a place where it wouldn't have operated in a fashion that would have been productive.
A former mayor threatened to sue over that if we did the roundabouts also, because he lived on Berry Road. But that was a plan I was actually very in support of just because we were gonna be adding one new traffic signal at Wiley, and in the original plan, we were putting a second new one in at Murphy, but ended up not doing that. But that by widening Lindsay Street to 4 lanes, and with the roundabouts, the U-turn lanes would have been unnecessary. So we came to a compromise and we did the raised median and the U-turn lanes instead of the roundabouts. But yeah, I remember that very vividly, and Dan Burden coming in and David Boren. Yeah, it would have been pretty nice if I could have done it, I think, but yeah.
So one of the other things with roundabouts, and this more is towards active transportation and pedestrians. And you see the little graphic up here. With roundabouts, it does eliminate several potential conflicts, not only for vehicular traffic, but also for pedestrian conflicts.
You see all the little yellow dots, those are pedestrian conflicts when a normalized signalized intersection. When you look at a roundabout, now you have less, you have 8 as opposed to 24, plus you have the opportunity for pedestrians to have a safe refuge in the middle here. So if a person was trying to cross from, I'm gonna say east to west in this location, they have the opportunity to only have to look for traffic in this one direction. They get to the middle refuge area here. Now they only have to look at this direction here. So they don't have to look at 2 or 3 different locations for pedestrian vehicular.
And just one lane they
Yes,
have to cross at a
literally
time.
one lane. Again, some of the things that we're gonna try to work with staff with and provide them, and I use the word matrix, and it may not be a matrix, but some design considerations that could be applied to intersection design improvements that will allow you all to evaluate a signalized intersection versus a roundabout. And some of the design elements here that is, again, more on the national level here. So we talk about smaller roundabouts, single lane roundabouts, and multi-lane roundabouts. Obviously, traffic speed is one of the big things through there. The number of lanes that will be entering into a roundabout. 1 lane in each direction, each 4-legged direction or 5-legged direction. Some of the other things that we have to look at in roundabout design is turning movements for larger trucks. What we call the WB67 vehicles, which are the trucks that travel on those roadways, fire, trash trucks, buses, those kind of things. Those all go into consideration for this. You also want to look at what the center island treatment may be looking like. What we don't encourage in roundabout design is a lot of trees, a lot of vertical. We want to be able to have that vision across the entire roundabout. So we see somebody is coming from the north and they come into the roundabout. We want to be able to see them prior to them just being right in front of you. And then volumes of traffic, those are the big things that we also see. Traffic volumes on average daily traffic, where does that break start? Going from a single lane to potentially a multi-lane roundabout. So those are some of the just general things that we look at in roundabout design. We talked about right-of-way and geometry, utility conflicts. I think that's also something that, particularly here in Norman, that we need to be very aware of is, will a signalized intersection minimize the amount of costly utility relocations when we start talking about fiber or we start talking about underground power and those kind of things. So we think that is a checkbox that would be applicable to Norman for those kind of things. So we want to look at that. And again, safety is the biggest criteria for us in a typical design element. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit, before we jump to road diets, any questions so far on the roundabouts?
Just that, in addition to urban ones, and you did talk about a couple rural options, but like one of the examples would be like driving east on Alameda towards the lake, or on Robinson or Lindsay or any of the streets that go out there. And always just the concern that somebody's gonna shoot across when you're off 48th or whatever. And, a 4-way stop doesn't
always get it.
do anything to stop that from happening if somebody ignores it. And so rural, since we have such a large rural area, we have so many section line roads that cross each other, where in the rural area specifically even might be good options, like on Alameda going towards the lake, if 48th and 60th and
So that's part of what we discussed as a team here is we need a 2-lane urban, 2-lane rural, and a multi-lane urban. We need to have all three of those, and we need something that's kind of the standardized starting point, so we can kind of overlay it and go, okay, it's a good starting point, but also the criteria that would apply where we could say, you know, okay, this one is now having problems, we need to go to a four-way stop. Can we convert it to a roundabout? What would be the time frame to do that? Do we need to, you know, so yes, rural is one of our considerations. We're making sure that that will be addressed and that we'll have tools that we can use to help evaluate those.
Awesome. Thank you.
We want to have it be very much like our sidewalk program is now, where somebody calls in and requests a sidewalk. We can say, it's on the list, it's 35 of 50. We want to do the same thing with roundabouts. Yes, we've evaluated that.
I'm appreciative that you're listening to some of the AIM Norman master plan
Yeah.
updates, because East Norman or East Alameda, you know, is gonna be that specialized corridor. And, you know, for somebody that lives in East Norman, I see these kind of things. The roundabout, say on Alameda, may not be applicable to a roundabout at 60th and East Lindsay.
Yeah.
You know, even though they have similar characteristics, they may not. And so again, we want to give staff the tools to evaluate those in a objective manner every time
And repeatable.
and repeatable.
That to me, I need something that's repeatable. So what we do in 2024 would be the same as what we do in 2026, so that it's not a bias based, and take away the subjective decision and make it objective.
So kind of switching gears a little bit, Scott asked us to talk a little bit about road diets. You know, really the criteria again starts at the Federal Highway Administration, and they have some guidelines that start with ADT. You know, what makes a good road diet between this ADT, average daily traffic, you know, is kind of the starting point. What type of vehicles are those going through there? Are they large trucks every day? And I will use Porter as a great example, you know, with the dairy through there. You know, the lower ADTs make good candidates through there. Vehicle types we talked about do influence it, but one of the biggest keys that we see with road diets needs to be a detailed traffic analysis. If you are changing the characteristic of a roadway that people have used for a very long time, and they are used to being 4 lanes, and now it's 3, and your traffic is now from 2 lanes in one direction to 1 lane in direction, and you're now at that stoplight that used to be only a minute delay and now is 3-minute delays. Those are the kind of the things that we want to make sure of when you do a road diet, that you have that detailed traffic analysis in your back pocket to help substantiate that capital outlay. The good thing about road diets, obviously you add bike lanes. Now, one of the things that we're hearing in AIM Norman is the bike community really kind of likes to have their side path as opposed to being in traffic. With road diets now, you kind of still give them a little bit wider than that minimum 4 foot. So those are things that are typical features through that. Pedestrian refuge islands, particularly at intersections, are something that is a positive for that. 2-way left turn lanes, obviously in a corridor that has a lot of businesses, a lot of driveways, a lot of access where you can't limit and control that access. That is a great feature. Again, the before and after, you see the travel time is going to go up through there. Peak speeds, those are all going to go down because now you're closer from a 12-foot lane even to an 11-foot lane. You're closer to that vehicle. And if you drive Porter like I do, when the big dairy trucks are right next to me, I definitely slow down and let them go by because I know they're getting ready to make a turn here in a little bit. So just some general high level guidelines, but again, I want to emphasize the need for that detailed traffic study. Next slide, please.
So to kind of talk about the different types of road diets. Right now, one of the projects we do have that we are moving forward on was one of the items in the comprehensive transportation plan was to do a road diet on Alameda. And we looked at Alameda, and Alameda is not the same between Porter and 12th as it is from 12th and beyond. There's definitely a change in use and a change in feel. And so we started looking at that corridor, and we have the space between Porter and 12th to do a road diet, just reduce the lane width. So we maintain 4 lanes, and we can still add bike lanes. And it works great because they're extra wide lanes.
Very wide.
Very wide. So that's a great place where you can do just narrowing the lanes and get that. There was a lot of concern about what happens where you're turning in. It's not pumpkin shell there, is it?
Yeah.
It is. There was a lot of concern about what happens when people are trying to turn in there and it's one lane. We agreed and we looked at that. So that was one decision. But then as you transition to the other side of 12, you can start looking at being a 3-lane section and the traffic flow there. And because of you start seeing a reduced number of turns and driveways, it supports going down to a 3-lane section. And then that lines up with what we go into as you keep moving out as you get further out. So we're going to be using both types of those on one roadway on opposite sides of an intersection. And so the hard part now is just where are we going to drop that extra lane, and it's going to be on the east side of 12th. But just an example of a place where we're using both and making the difference between which one we need at what location.
Councilmember Grant?
I was kind of curious about a road diet on Boyd, especially since we did things to make it more walkable. Having taken a walk out there last spring, it didn't really feel that safe. And then thinking about projects that are coming that are going to increase density, maybe not in the section of Boyd that I just referenced, but a little further down, and seeing upwards of 250 people in this area, and thinking that they don't want to lose their parking and they're going to want to walk or bike
Sure.
or scooter.
And we're going to kind of wrap up the end with the 3 requests that you had of Porter, Classen, and Boyd. Basically, what we want to do is we want to take and we need to really look at what's going to happen. What's going to happen at Aspen University? Is it going to cause the delays to go from, like Brett was saying, 45 seconds to 3 minutes? Is that going to be an acceptable change? Are we going from a level of service C or D to an F? And we want to perform some studies to really look at that. We've looked at Boyd in the past and it wasn't real favorable, but let's look at it again. Let's look at it with new lens, new eyes, and the same thing on Porter. But we also feel like we need to give Porter a little more time. We've just taken, Norman Regional Hospital out of there. Their numbers just changed. James Garner is still normalizing. What is going to be the traffic change on that stretch with James Garner? But we want to look at what's going to happen at Main and Gray. Well, now you got to consider Main and Gray as 2 ways instead of 1 ways. So there's a lot of interacting parts still, and we would like to, again, maybe wait till after the first of the year to really take a hard look at Porter. I look at Classen, and the only real problem I see there is maybe what happens at Boyd. And we're talking about, so we just feel like we just need to study it and then bring that back and be able to have a discussion about what is the acceptable delay as you move forward. Because at some point you get to a point where it's just not working, and then we're getting the phone calls twice a week of why am I sitting here through 3 cycles of lights. But so that's kind of where we're going to wind up here, is that there's those 3, and then there's other locations that we're already, that we've been very successful with them. Rock Creek Road, Main Street. We're looking at doing another one on 48th between Main and Robinson. 48th going north of Robinson. We've already made the decision to only do 3 lanes. There's other locations that we're looking at, and our CTP does now give us the option of a 3-lane arterial street, which is a great tool. And we're looking at that and saying, do we need 4 lanes? Can we do 3? What's the impact? What does it do to our traffic flow? So that's kind of where we like them. We just want to make sure that we don't create a negative impact that winds up coming back and we wind up, So we really want to study these things. We want to make sure we get it right the first time.
I was going to mention Boyd and Classen as seemingly, if there's space to do it, a good spot for a roundabout.
do.
'Cause it is a
We're gonna say
weird-
that. I can
Like
see it in
only
your
one
eyes.
leg has a green
Yeah.
at a time, and so it's I try to avoid that intersection actually because I feel like every time I approach it, hits red for me. So
Yeah, and that's one where we probably have to look really hard at,
it's tight.
the right of way could be the constrict there, because I don't think we're gonna buy the Mont.
No, and I
So-
didn't want to.
And I don't think they're gonna give up any of their patio.
Every
But-
time I see cars, including myself,
Yeah.
going south on Classen right there, and you hit that intersection, it's
Mhm.
almost like a slingshot. I am amazed that somebody hasn't
And-
flown off into the Mont.
And I think that's a great one to
doesn't
put on
happen.
the list, once we come up with criteria to have it studied and look at in more detail.
Councilor Hinkle.
I'd like to, kind of the slingshot train of thought there, I'd like to look at 24th Avenue Northwest and Boardwalk. Right there where the neighborhood and the office park and all of the retail that's Westside Walmart and Best Buy and all that stuff. With the southbound traffic coming out of North Park and the northbound traffic coming off of Main Street. And they both curve into each other right there at Boardwalk. I don't know if there's a diet or a roundabout or something, but it seems like
I
that
know
could.
that intersection was put in, that traffic signal was put in 5, 10, less than 10 years ago.
I'm gonna say it was 7 to 10.
Yeah.
Cause I was here when that was done. I think that's another great opportunity for a place to look at for something like that.
Just to
Mhm.
see.
Yeah, but that may be one that because of the north-south, that it doesn't work so well because the side streets don't, but that would be another one to be worth study, absolutely.
I'd just be curious, because that always seems like
Mhm.
when you're turning left onto Boardwalk going northbound, I mean, people are flying southbound.
Yeah.
So if you get the flashing yellow, it's like, okay. Yeah. I think I'll
No.
just wait.
Another great one that we can put on the list once we have criteria to study. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, next slide, please. Unless you're done talking about this one.
I thought we were gonna talk about that one again.
Benefits, and this is kind of just a summary slide for you all to start thinking about. The roundabout, obviously, we start talking about the conflict points, whether that be vehicular or pedestrian. Again, safety is always at the top priority for us. The operational movements, with roundabouts, again, you wanna look and make sure that they have some balance, talking about 24th and Boardwalk. Make sure that there's some balance there, because if somebody comes in and 24th is heavily used during peak times, that may not be conducive to a roundabout design. Speed reduction, again, the slingshot, at Boyd and Classen through there. You know, there's a lot of different other things, you know, for benefits, public art, landscaping, green infrastructure opportunities. You know, using that center island as low impact development, very similar to the median on James Garner right now. Road diets, and I think this is one of the other things, you know, converting a 3-lane to a 4-lane, you know, that's kind of a national average.
4-lane to 3-lane.
Sorry, 4 into a 3-lane. 19 to, you know, 20 to 50%, somewhere in that range is kind of a national average when you do that. Again, we caution that it needs to be done with a traffic study. Probably needs to make sure that the traffic volumes are not going to increase. We use Porter as a great example, you know, with the hospital moving. You know, some of that volume of traffic's gonna go down, so that would probably lend itself more to a road diet in that location through there. And again, you know, pedestrian safety, for a road diet, you know, have islands now, in that center median area through there, bike lanes, those are good things, through there. So just kind of a summary through that, and again, Federal Highway has some really general high-level guidelines. We wanna boil and funnel that down to what's gonna be specific for Norman as we go forward. So, questions?
So
Yeah.
kind of to me, that's kind of where, so what we want to do is we're, you know, with your input, we would like to take this, work with Garver to have these items included into the CTP to where we have something that we can use. We have the tools we need to be able to make evaluations. We can get things done correctly. some good design guidelines, and so that we can get things designed properly. And then we could begin to implement more of these. We've shown that we like roundabouts, we like road diets. Kind of like I tell people, I can always tighten a bolt with a pair of pliers, but it sure works a lot better if I use my wrench. So sometimes it's a right tool in the right place, but we certainly feel like we need to be evaluating locations where people have requests. And the ones that you brought up today, Classen and Boyd, I think I've sat there and thought it before, but it didn't pop in my head. That's a great, thought process, and sometimes other people can look at it with a different viewpoint. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to continue, we're kind of working on what they think the additional workload would be to put that into the CTP, which would be a contract, come back as a contract amendment to council with us asking you, we'd find the money within our public works budget to have these items included so that we could begin to move in this direction and be able to use the modern tools that we see utilized in other communities and make sure that Norman's given the best we can for all of our road users. And I would like to state that we did adopt a Complete Streets Manual as part of our engineering design criteria, and a Complete Streets Manual says that we design it for everybody. It's not just for vehicles, it is for pedestrians and cyclists and transit and all those items. So, we want to continue, and these are tools that help us be more adept and move in that direction even more.
Well, a couple of the notes related issues with Porter and Main, or not Main so much, but Porter and Main, for example, traffic going east on Main Street. At Porter, you can go straight in the middle lane or left or right. And often cars in the right lane that are supposed to turn right on Porter will go straight along with the middle lane because it looks like it's continued, and even with our changes to that intersection, I got another complaint about that just yesterday, actually. I was like, they're like, some people just keep going straight right there. I don't know what the deal is.
And I know there's parking there, and we couldn't quite get that island to come out enough without taking more parking. We can take a look at that and see if there's maybe, I don't know, we could take a look at that and just see if there's anything else we can do that may help make that a little bit clearer.
So with Porter, I know that the 3-lane idea goes even way back to the Porter plan as being one of the multiple options that were considered. With Porter, to me, especially working at Friendly Market all these years and just observing it on a somewhat daily basis, before and after construction, it's just always been real noticeable to me, especially since we're across the street from the dairy. And I see the trucks all the time. And when they pull out of the dairy and they go north on Porter to Eufaula, they often want to turn left at Eufaula, but there's no left turn signal and there's no left turn lane. And even when it's not the trucks, people wanting to turn left onto Eufaula will stop, and then all the cars behind them will swerve into the outer lane to avoid them. And I've seen a lot of conflicts with that and lots of horn honking and some. When we had the back out parking in front of Friendly, that was a pretty interesting situation a lot of times when someone would be trying to back up and then a car is swerving around a car trying to turn left. And up and down Porter, you see that where, because there's no turn lane or turn signal, there's so much traffic coming this way, they don't have a gap to turn left, and then the traffic behind them backs up and they all start trying to get into the next lane. And then just people trying to cross Porter at Eufaula or Main. I mean, that's the biggest one I get the complaints about is Main and Porter, especially during the art walk, and how, it's a walk sign the same time as it's a green light for traffic on Main to turn on to Porter from both sides. And people get impatient, but that you have to walk across 4 lanes of traffic, and that the street itself is actually a 3-lane. It's the width of a 3-lane street, but has the 4 skinny lanes marked on it, which is good for slowing down traffic most of the time. But I've noticed since the reduction of on-street parking on Porter and the hard curb, that it does seem like people are driving faster now that there's not a conflict of cars backing up.
See, I would think the curb would have the influence of slowing people down because you're more likely to bang the curb.
I know. No,
Because
now
the
they're like,
cars,
"Oh, there's nobody
the
backing
cars,
up."
but the cars were never that close to the roadway. They were always,
Right.
so And we actually did, part of the design, and Brett's team did that design, but part of the design was, that's why there's those black bands that come out from each pole, is because it kind of gives you that,
Right.
that click. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a visual thing to try to help slow down traffic. So it was one of the things that was very intentionally put into the corridor, you know, and along with, you know, trying to do the landscaping and the things that we've done to try to create that sense of tightness. We actually, that was part of the design of the corridor, much like we did on Lindsay Street. The trees
Yeah.
make you feel a little bit tighter, a little less likely to want to speed. But we understand what you're saying, and that's why we want to take a good look at it and see, you know, can we do this and keep a tolerable vehicular can we balance? The question is, where's the balance point? And we really just need to have better data. We've got the data from that we did during design, so we have fairly recent data, we have older data, and then we could look at the post data once we, like I said, I would like to see if James Garner pulls more traffic off before we do it, so
Right.
that doesn't sway the results.
I know that's been the stance of staff for
Yeah.
a long time, is James Garner getting done and seeing how that works out. And yeah, I agree, because even, you know, with my observations, that's not data. And so
Yeah.
I
It's-
would like to see traffic data currently on Porter between Alameda and Robinson, or you know, that corridor. And, you know, what is the situation with people trying to turn left and there not being a turn signal or turn lane? And is that causing certain delays, and would a dedicated left turn lane bring relief to that situation? I know the southbound on Porter at Alameda, trying to turn and go east on Alameda, you know, that turn lane is very short, and people just, you know, it backs up all the way past our striping there that we did, or that was already there that we redid.
It's just a common problem at many intersections. That's
Yeah.
fairly, it happens at 24th and Main going southbound, where it's a dual turn lane, it's still back up all the way, so.
Yeah, so that's one thing, and just that, you know, the idea that Main and Gray are 3-lane streets, you know, having Porter be a 3-lane street that ties in, you know, nice and neat with those two streets, and the left turn lanes and less lanes for pedestrians to have to cross, even if it's the same actual feet width, one less bumper facing you is helpful. And then same thing with Classen, you know, part of that from Alameda to Lindsay-ish, Brooks Lindsay, is that it's almost entirely residential. You got the school there. It's not seemingly as high traffic count. Seems like a lot of the traffic goes east on Alameda.
It does drop, and actually the school may be what makes it not as obtainable, because it may be just like the complaints that we were hearing from people in Alameda, of what during school pickup and drop off, parents are out onto the roadway. Well, now they're blocking the only lane of access. And that may actually work to the detriment of going to a 3-lane. That's why we need to do the traffic study. All the things you're talking about are the exact reason we want to study it
Yes.
and
Maybe a
check it
central
out.
turn lane helps them get in and out of Lincoln easier. I don't know, but it seems like a 3-lane street would be more friendly if in the neighborhood setting there,
I tend to agree.
and maybe would help with that intersection at Boyd. And then Boyd, you know, it's only 4 lanes from Flood to Boyd to Classen, and then it's 2 lanes on each end going and till it terminates. And then we know we have issues and complaints about Aspen and Boyd, and the, you know, one leg has a turn signal but not a turn lane, but has a left arrow, and then the other leg doesn't have an arrow. And I see that same thing where people decide they want to turn left, and then all the cars behind them slam on their brakes and swerve. And then with the newer residential stuff being built facing Boyd, and we did stand out there last spring, and you know, cars zipping by you, it definitely didn't feel that comfortable. And so just thinking about, you know, kind of like a connected Boyd's 3 lanes, Classen's 3 lanes, Porter's 3 lanes, Gray and Main and James Garner are all 3 lanes. That, I don't know, it seemed like seems like it
Garner.
would tie in real, or 2 and 3 lanes. I guess.
James Garner's 2 lanes.
Yeah.
Except at some of the intersections.
Right. So it just seems like it would tie in really well and help they're all like that they could flow really well together and make it more pedestrian friendly and more pedestrian focused instead of how fast can we get as many cars through here as possible. And so part of me definitely prefers prioritizing pedestrians over, if the cars have to wait one more minute, but it makes the street safer for people to walk across it, I think it's worth it. But I definitely agree with you in wanting to see a more detailed analysis of these three specifically and those factors, and then see what might make sense for those going forward. And then there's some other streets too that I'd, like Imhoff between Chautauqua and Highway 9, where they're like really wide, but they're only 2 lanes. So it's like, oh, it looks like we could probably fit bike lanes in there or something like that. So other areas like that I know staff's already been looking at, but just some spots like that where even the new James Garner is pretty wide. It looks like it probably could fit 2 cars going in there, but
It's actually too narrow for that, but it is designed to where a car could pull over to let an emergency vehicle by. And that's why it's so wide. 17 foot is kind of your minimum for that, to be able to get one car out of the way to allow an emergency vehicle through.
Right.
And so that was our design criteria on that one. So those would be 8.5 foot lanes. And if you ever parked an 8.5 foot, pickups aren't gonna,
And I don't think
gonna
we need a
slam
bike,
yours.
we don't need a bike lane on that section since we have the 10 foot.
Yeah, and we built that one
path, so-
intentionally
yeah.
for the bike lanes.
But like I said, Imhoff, Chautauqua, and Highway 9, that is a pretty wide section that maybe could fit that. And then the Alameda part you were talking about too, I do see a lot of people riding bikes from Porter to.
And that's a
12th and
project that
beyond,
is
so-
actually, that's a project. That one's moving. That
And I
one.
could see, I mean, I like the idea of it. I wondered how it would work because it is so wide. I mean, 5 lanes and like extra wide lanes, it seems like. If it remained 4 lane, or if it was reduced, if it was narrowed, I guess, so that there were still 4 lanes, but they were narrower lanes, I would assume you could still have a turn lane wherever you might determine one is necessary, if it's in front of Gingerbread or whatever. And it kind of, whatever.
We're those designs are underway.
I think
Just
bike lane
get
on
going.
Alameda, since there's not a 10-foot multimodal path on either side of bike lanes, if they can fit, that would be pretty helpful, and I think it would be pretty heavily used too, so.
Just to update that project, its final plans have been submitted to ODOT. Once they authorize the funds, that's not the right term. They get the funds allocated from the federal government for the grant, it will move forward on the state contract to stripe that, restripe that.
Okay.
And will include bike lanes.
So we're in the, I didn't realize we'd had final plans. That
Yeah.
was-
Oh, that's cool.
We talked about the project. I shouldn't realize that final plans were submitted.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It should move any day, literally any day.
So we'll see that one very soon.
Okay. All right, any final comments or questions from council about road diets, runabouts?
No, I just appreciate having a consistent matrix criteria, whatever you want to call it, so that as we move forward, it makes a lot of sense throughout the city.
Makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said too, if it not only makes areas more pedestrian safe, if road diets can, maybe they result in it taking a little bit longer to drive through the corridor, but if it reduces crashes and accidents, there's a big push to not even call them accidents anymore, because a lot of crashes can be a result of road design and just people not paying attention. So is it really an accident if you're not paying attention? So, but if it reduces crashes, if it makes it safer for pedestrians, then to me, that would hold up a higher score or whatnot than if it can move X amount of cars through.
Safety is probably gonna be one of the primary weighted, I don't know that we're actually weighting, but safety will be one of the most important factors. But it is that balance between safety versus acceptable delay
Yeah.
time.
And I mean, Lindsay Street, we all know, it can be congested through campus, and I drive through it often, and sometimes I do avoid it. But in general, even when it's really busy, it may be like an extra 5 minutes or 10 maybe. And I feel like we don't have very many crashes on that section of Lindsay, no fatality crashes that I can think of between Jenkins and Elm Street. And because traffic has to move slow, and it's 3-lane section, and it's extremely heavy pedestrian.
And there's no turns.
And if we just had that one crossing in front of Dale Tower, if we could get rid of that one, I know David and I have talked about that.
Well, we're
If we
actually,
were able to do something about that, I think the whole thing would work much better.
we've got an entire project where we're looking at that whole corridor from Elm to Jenkins. And we're looking at probably removing some of the the third lane there in part of it. And maybe, we're really looking
Yeah.
at making that a pedestrian corridor.
And it's just, Lindsay Street though shows me that a 3-lane street like that can work really well and move a lot of traffic and be a safe, pedestrian friendly and safe for vehicles as well, even though it takes a little bit longer to get through it sometimes, so. Anyway, all right, anything final from you guys? Okay, well, thank you, staff, thank you so much. I look forward to following up on this in a few months after the year. And
Yeah,
see
well,
where we're
like I
at.
said, around the first of the year, we'll start getting all of our groups together and figuring out what our timeframes are. Get through the holiday season, get the students back after the holidays is really what we'll aim for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, if that's it, then this